Parsha Shelach, probably the most significant thing in this is the story of the spies. And basically what happens is the Jewish people become a little bit concerned. We're going to go to the land of Israel, and we're going to have to take over this land from the 7 nations who are there. Now that sounds, we might think, well, God's with us, and whatever God wants us to do is going to happen. And that's fine. But they were a little concerned that perhaps it's going to happen, but some of us are going to die, or some of us aren't going to make it. There's going to be a war, and they're going to be difficult. So they wanted to know what the facts are. We want to go and see. So perhaps we could send some people into the land of Israel, and they can look around. And they'll come back and tell us what they found, and then we'll know what's going to happen. Now, originally, God's not so happy about this, and neither is Moshe, because if God says you're going to go to the land of Israel, you're going to go to the land of Israel. God's not going to put you in a situation that either his words aren't true, that's for sure, or that it's going to be so difficult that you're not going to be able to accomplish it. Right? So therefore, they were upset that the Jewish people didn't trust God to the extent that they felt that they had to send spies to find out. Right? It's like, let's say, the kid gets up in the morning, he asks his mother, "What's the weather like outside?" So the mother says, "Well, it's cool. You should wear a jacket." So he gets dressed and he gets ready. He goes, and he doesn't put on a jacket. He goes outside to look what the weather's like. So why does he do that? Why does he ask his mother first? Is she going to lie to him? She says it's cool, you need a jacket, and it's true. It's cool, you need a jacket. Why does he have to go look on his own? It's because he doesn't really trust her in this area so well. Maybe it's changed. Maybe she just wants me to wear a jacket because she thinks later it'll get cold. Maybe she's just being a mother. Whatever it is, he doesn't fully accept what she says. And it's the same thing here. And here you're talking about God, who has no ulterior motives, who only wants to do what's best for us, and who knows all of the things that are going to happen. So they weren't so happy. But finally it says that God leads a person in the way he wants to go. And you want to do something, eventually God will allow you to do it. And therefore the Jewish people wanted to send spies, so he allowed them to send spies. But he doesn't tell them that they have to. And it begins by saying this, Vayedaber Hashem LaMoshe Lemor, Hashem says to Moshe, teach the following, Shlach lecha anashim v'yasuru es haaretz Canaan. Right? So you should send spies, send men who will spy out the land of Canaan. Now it sounds like it's a commandment. Send, right? Send the men. But the commentaries tell us that it's not a command. He says you have permission. You want to, as I said, we had this whole dialogue going on. The Jewish people go to Moshe, we like to send spies. Moses says, well, are you crazy? God told you everything's fine. What do you want spies for? So they say, no, we want spies. So Moshe asks God. God finally says, okay, you can send spies. So it's not that you have to send spies. God would prefer they didn't. But if you're going to do it, right, so then God says you have permission. So here he's saying you have permission. Then it's an important difference. We'll see soon. And they're coming to V'yasuru es haaretz. They're coming to spy out the land. So, right? Vayisuru is to spy, right? To look out or something. What land? The land of Canaan. And what about the land of Canaan? Asher ani nosein livnei Yisrael, which I have given to the Jewish people. Ish echad lamata avosav tishlachu kol nasivehem. Each tribe can send the head of their tribe to go and be the spies, and they can go and accomplish this. Right? And then it says that they actually did that. But there's a couple of questions right away in the beginning of the Parsha that cause problems, especially if you've read the Parsha and you go to the end of it, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the end, we're going to look at a section that seems to be added in, that has nothing to do really, we think, with the spies. I'll tell you exactly where it is when I get myself back to it. And it's going to be somewhere around 8:17, 8:16. It begins on 8:16 and 8:17. It's the maftir, it's the end of the parsha. And here we find, again, something interesting. Vayomer Hashem LaMoshe Lemor. You've heard this before. Hashem says to Moshe, saying, and now this is going to be a famous paragraph. Daber el b'nei Yisrael, you should speak to the Jewish people. Right? This is beginning with verse 37 in the English, if you want to look at it in English. V'amarta lehem, and say to them, v'yasu lehem tzitzis, you should make tzitzis. Right? Tzir or tzitzitar, you should make these. Al kanfei bigdeihem ledorosam, and they should be placed on the corners of your clothes for generations. V'nasnu al tzitzis, and you should place on these tzitzis al kanaf psil techeles, that are the tzitzis which are placed on the corner of your clothes. One of the strings should be this purple blue color. And it should be to you all that you have tzitzis. And why? Urisem also, so you should look at them. Uzartem is called a mitzvos Hashem, and you should look at, and by doing that, you'll remember all of the commandments that God has given you. V'yasisem osam, and you'll do the commandments. Then it says, V'los asuru acharei levalchem v'acharei nechem, and that you will not, because of that, you will not go after your heart and your eyes. Asher atem zonim achreim, which you do go after sometimes. So here you notice a couple of interesting points. Here it talks about the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the mitzvah of tzitzis is a mitzvah that if you wear a piece of clothing that has 4 corners on it, right? 4 corners. A man, actually, if a man wears a piece of clothing with 4 corners, he has to put tzitzit on that. If you don't wear clothing with 4 corners, you don't have to put tzitzit on it. Since we have the custom, because we want to do the mitzvah, so we go out of our way to put on clothes with 4 corners. So men will wear, under their clothes, they wear tzitzit, and they have a piece of clothes on that has 4 corners, and there's tzitzit on that. And then when we pray, we put on a talit, a talis, right, which is also the same thing. But clearly, what it's telling you is you don't have to wear clothes with 4 corners. But if you want to wear clothes with 4 corners, you have to put these tzitzit on it. Now today, wearing clothes with 4 corners is not so common for men. We don't wear, we wear pants and a jacket. There's no 4 corners on it. Our jackets have rounded corners in the front. It has to be real corners, like 90-degree angles basically. So you don't really have it. But it used to be when people wore togas, or people were in the desert and they wore the type of clothing that was loose, like sheets, right? So those had 4 corners. So it was very common that you would wear tzitzit. So we want to do it, so we get ourselves special clothes that we wear so that we can fulfill the mitzvah. Now, if that's the case, we find an interesting correlation between the beginning of the parsha and the end. Because I told you at the beginning that the Jews wanted to send the spies. And it appears that God is saying to them, send spies. But He's not. The commentaries all say that God just basically said, okay, you want to send spies, you're allowed to send spies. But certainly if they didn't want to, God wasn't going to make them, because He didn't want them to do it. Right? So here you have permission. Right? They have permission to send spies, but they don't have a mitzvah to send spies, a commandment. Here we have a very important mitzvah, the mitzvah of tzitzit. The Talmud tells us that the mitzvah of tzitzit, because the Torah says you will wear the tzitzit, and when you do, it'll cause you to remember all of my mitzvot, and you'll do them, right? By virtue of this says that you'll remember all my mitzvot and you'll do them. The Talmud tells us that the mitzvah of tzitzit in a way is equal to all of the mitzvahs in the Torah. Why? Because of course you wear tzitzit and it reminds you of all of them and you'll do them. So therefore it's like it's equal to all of them. So this is an important mitzvah. This is not no small mitzvah that you come across once every 7 years. This is a mitzvah that's very fundamental. It's very important because it reminds a Jew all the time, don't do things wrong. Look, you're wearing special clothing, right? The commentaries tell us that you know, when you think of a king used to wear like royal robes, and they had a lot of money, so they wore extra material, and they would have a train behind them, right? You know, it would drag on the ground. That was a sign of royalty, of wealth, right? Just like a bride, she has a long train behind her. Because you don't need a train. What's the purpose of that? The floor doesn't need clothes. It's there because I have so much money that I put extra things on my clothes because it looks nice. It makes me look nice. That's a sign of royalty. So tzitzit was a symbol of the same idea. Tzitzit have no purpose in and of themselves for our clothes. They don't keep you warm. You don't tie them to attach your clothes together. They're there just on the corners as extra pieces. It's also a sign of the royalty, the majesty of the Jewish people. And that's why they had a purple-blue string called techelet. We don't know exactly the shade today, but we have a good idea. And that was, of course, in history, purple-blue was the color of majesty, of royalty. Kings, queens, they wore purple. So that's what the symbol is, right? So it's a very important mitzvah, but yet it's not an obligatory mitzvah. You don't have to do it. If my entire life I never wear clothes with 4 corners, I don't have to wear a talis. I don't have to wear tzitzis. I choose to wear a talis. Okay, so everyone has chosen to do it for so long that it's become a custom that we do it. But the reality is, if I never did it, I'm not doing anything wrong. So you say, how could God make a mitzvah that's so important and yet you don't have to do it? You do it if you need to do it. And then it's the same thing as with the spies. Here the spies were so important to the Jewish people. They wanted to know if they're going to go into Israel, what's it going to be like? Should we be ready for war? Should we be ready just to walk in? What's going to happen when we get there? So they said it's very important, but God doesn't tell them to go. In fact, He doesn't want them to go. He just lets them go. So you see, in both cases, you have permission. Permission to send spies and permission to wear tzitzit. You don't have to send spies. You don't have to wear tzitzit. Right? So there's a similarity. There's another one. If we look back on that first line, and don't look back, because I want to take you in a second right back to where we are. You'll notice that the words in the first line says, Shlach lecha nashim, send men vayasuru es aretz, and they will, I said, it's to spy out the land. Vayasuru, right, is a funny word. Right? It means to spy, right? That they're going to spy. And you find back, if you go back to where we were, and it says on page 816, the second to last line, it says, "V'lo sasuru achrei levavchem." You should not go after your heart, the achrei einechem, and after your eyes. But it's the same word. Sasuru and sur is the same word. So if in the front of the book it means, so you should send out men to spy the land, find out what's going on in the land of Israel. Here it also is that you're going to wear these tzitzit so that you should not spy out after your heart, or you should not go after your heart and after your eyes. Instead, you should do what's right. Right? So when you see your tzitzit, it reminds you to do mitzvot. But again, you see the same word. You don't find this word in other places in the Torah. The two places you find this word is at the beginning of this parsha, at the end of this parsha. So clearly, we have two similarities between the beginning and the end of the parsha, and they're unique similarities in that you don't find this anywhere else. On that basis, it's telling us that the beginning and the end should be put together. And it tells you something, right? It's teaching you something, a little bit more than the words themselves. And part of it is as follows. The idea in the beginning of the parsha that, we have the idea that you have this fundamental mitzvah at the end of tzitzit that's so important, and it teaches us so much, and it's so important that the Talmud says it's equal to all the other mitzvot, but yet you don't have to do it. Right, is coming to fix the problem that happens with the spies. God says you can send the spies. You don't have to, but you can. You want to do this? Right? If you want to do this, you better make sure you do it right. You do it correctly. And they didn't. The spies went, and they came back with horrible stories about the land of Israel, that it's a terrible place, and it's so difficult there, people die young, and even with all the abundance of food, it's still not easy to live there. And they came back and told these terrible stories, and the Jews said, how are we going to win? The people who live there are so strong and so big, and the land is so difficult. And they started to cry. Right? So God punishes the Jewish people for that. But because what happened? Because they went after their heart and their eyes. They didn't do what was right. They did what they thought that they wanted. They were afraid. So what does it mean when you go after your heart and your eyes? Your heart feels, your eyes see what your heart feels. Right? And therefore, if your heart is like, I'm afraid to go to this land, so then your eyes are going to see to prove your point. So the mitzvah of tzitzit comes to fix that. The mitzvah of tzitzit also is not an obligation. And it's saying, before you weren't obligated to send spies. And that you did. So I'm going to give you a mitzvah you're not obligated to do. But if you do this mitzvah, it will repair the damage of the spies. How is that? Because when the spies went to Israel, they saw what they wanted to see. And I'll explain to you why. They saw what they wanted to see, and they wanted to see trouble. They didn't want to go into the land of Israel. They were afraid. So therefore, they saw these things that made it that they wouldn't go. They went after their eyes. So now if you wear tzitzit, it's going to help you not go after your eyes and not go after your heart. It's going to help you do what's right. And therefore the mitzvah of tzitzit is not an obligation, because it's coming to repair something that also wasn't an obligation. And just as the thing that wasn't the obligation of sending spies, the end result was bad because the people were so subjective and they had ulterior motives that it was a disaster. So too with tzitzit comes to fix that by stopping us from allowing ourselves to do what's wrong. So that when we look at our tzitzit, it reminds us to do the mitzvah. And therefore it fixes what happens in the beginning. So I said that there were ulterior motives, right, with the spies. And the spies went and then they came back. So how do we know this? So I'll give you an example. The Talmud says that when God said that the spies could go, he wanted to make sure that the spies had a good experience. So when they went there, they would come back and tell the Jewish people, don't worry about it. Yes, the nations that are there, the 7 nations, the idol worshippers, they're very tough. Right? I mean, these were savages. Right? They'd kill people. Right? They're difficult people. We're going to have a hard time. But God's with us. Don't worry. And how do we know God's with us? So I'll give you some examples. This is the spies, what they should have been saying. Is when we went there, for instance, we saw that God did not want us to get caught. He didn't want us to get caught. And we're strangers. They're going to recognize us. We dress differently. We look different. People will catch us. So what God did is he made that many people died. A lot of people died. Right? Not our people, but the people who lived in the country died. And when they died, people went to funerals. So everybody was busy preparing the dead, burying the dead, and going to funerals. So they're too busy to notice us. So we were able to get by. So that's a very nice thing that God did for them. He made it possible so they shouldn't get caught. But that's not what they said. That's what they saw. But what they said was, you can't believe this country. It's such a terrible country that people die all the time. And they die so much, right, that everyone's going to funerals all the time. You can't keep your job. You can't do anything. The land eats its people, it says. The land is so bad, it eats the people. The people can't live lives. So everyone's going to funerals. What kind of country is this for us? We don't want to go to a country like that, right? But that's what they perceived. But that's not what they saw. What they really saw was God was trying to save them, so he made this happen. Right? And how can I tell you for sure? So I'll tell you. If a person has, in your life, often as we get older, we know more people, sadly, who pass away. But when we're young, it's very rare, right? That we could go for years and years and years and never know a single person who passed away. And if you meet, but if you're a younger person and somebody passes away, everybody goes to the funeral, right? How many funerals do you go to? 1 a year, 1 every 5 years? You don't go very much. So you go when somebody passes away. But when you get to a point in your life where people pass away, much more common, so you'll notice that the funerals aren't as big. Because you go all the time. People are going one day after the other to a funeral. You have to live your living. You got to make it. You got to work. You got to take care of your families. You can't be going to funerals all the time. So the more funerals there are, the less people go, right? But here in the story, when the Jews were in the land of Canaan, which would be the land of Israel, and God was trying to make it so that they wouldn't get caught. So God caused it that people died, and that they had funerals. But yet so many people died. And they had so many funerals, yet everybody went. Everyone went to funerals. We say, well, that goes against what we just said. The fact that so many people are going to funerals, when there are so many funerals, comes to tell you there's a miracle going on here. Because it's not normal. When there's a lot of funerals, less people go, not more people. And the spies should have realized this is the hand of God, making it possible for us to not get caught. Instead, they said, you can't believe this crazy country. Everybody's dying all the time, and everyone's going to funerals all the time. We can't. How are we going to go to this country? So you see that they already decided before they went that what they're going to see there is going to be bad. They already knew it before they went. So they said, we're going to come back with a bad report. And that's exactly what they did. So here we see that just like, as I said, they were sent out. It was volunteer. They didn't have to go. They already knew that what they were going to see was going to be bad. It's going to be negative. And they didn't want to have a positive experience. So they came back and said a negative thing. So the tzitzis comes as also voluntary, and the purpose of it is so that you should not follow your eyes and your heart. You shouldn't follow after your ulterior motives. You should follow after the truth. And therefore the tzitzit comes to be, as we say in Hebrew, mechaper. It comes to atone for the sin of the spies. And that's why they're very similar. Did you have a question?
Okay. It said that Moses sent leaders of the tribe.
Yeah.
However, in the previous parasha, when it was Karbanot, it was different leaders of the tribes. It's not exactly the same.
Well, it calls it different names. There it's called the Rosh, right? You have the heads, right? And here it says, it says Kol Nasi Baham, every prince. So they're also used Nasim, princes, no?
But at least Caliph wasn't here.
Oh, you mean some of the people were different?
Yeah.
Right, that could be.
Wasn't.
So we have, so let's talk about that a bit. As we go on now into the next few lines, you'll notice that they're supposed to send anashim. Anashim is a word for men, right? But it also, anashim doesn't just mean men, because you can have other words for men. It means distinguished men. Like you've got, you can here you can have men who are like, homeless men, and then you can have regular men, and then you can have men of authority, men of distinguished men, leaders, right? And different categories of people. So here it says you have to send men. This word men means I don't want just regular people to go. God says, if you're going to send spies, I want to pack. I want to win. I want that they should come back with a positive report. So I'm going to do. God says, I'm going to do my part, but you have to send people who are great men, because so that way they'll come back and say what I want. We know they didn't, right? But that's why I use the Nashim. And then it tells you who they are, and it goes through all the different tribes and who they sent. The people were the heads of the tribes. Interestingly enough, we know that when they came back, right, all 12 came back. 10 of them said that it was terrible. Israel's terrible, and we're never going to make it. But 2 of them didn't. There's the 2 that she mentioned, and that was Kalev and Yehoshua. So those were 2 leaders of the Jewish people who came back with positive things. Right? And one of the very interesting ideas in it is that we notice that Moshe does something very odd before he sends them. He takes Yoshua and he changes his name. It's in verse 16 on page 799, and in 798 it's in the Hebrew. It says, these that we just said are the names of the men that Moshe sent to spy the land. And then it just says, Vayikra Moshe leHoshea ben Nun, and Moshe calls Hoshea ben Nun Yehoshua. He changes his name to Yehoshua. And that's how that little piece ends. An odd thing. Why does he change his name? What purpose is there to change his name from Hoshea to Yoshua? And why is it telling you here? He's just about to send them out as a spy, and he changes his name. So all the commentaries talk about this. On one that I found was very interesting is based on the Yonasan ben Uziel, who is a early commentator who would comment by translating the Torah into another language. He translated it into Aramaic. And when he translated it, he didn't translate it literally. He translated it based on his commentary. So there's always extra words or changed words that teaches you something. So Yonasan ben Uziel tells us in his commentary why Moshe changes Yoshua's name. And it says because he saw the humility of Yoshua, that he was humble. Right? Now Moshe, of course, was the most humble of all people. He saw that trait in Yoshua. And because of that, he changed his name. So this is a bit odd. Right? What is changing his name going to change that personality trait? And what's wrong with being humble? So the point was that Moshe understood that when the Jews are going to Israel and they come back with a bad message, so then you have someone like Yoshua and also Kalev, who are righteous people. They're going to come back with the true message, but they have to be prepared to stand up to everybody else. You've got 12 men going. Each one of them are powerful leaders, and 10 of them are coming back and saying this land of Israel is terrible. So you're going to have 2 of them who are going to have to stand up, and they'll stand up to the others and say you're wrong. It's good. That's not easy to do. And it's certainly not easy to do if you have a personality trait that you're humble. Right? If somebody's, if every one of you tell me that, today is Thursday, right, it's hard for me to say, no, it's Wednesday. Right? Because everybody in the room is telling me it's Thursday. Right? In fact, there was a psychological study that was done. I forgot the name of who did it. But they put together in a room 20 people. And 19 of the people were what we call shills. In other words, they were not part of the test. Only one person was part of the test. And they told all of those 19 people that we're going to show you the color blue. We want you to tell us it's orange. Tell me, when I ask you what color it is, you tell me it's orange. And every single person in the room is going to do that except one, who's the one person who's in the test, and he knows that blue is blue. He knows blue's not orange, right? Everybody knows this. So they go through the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They get to number 19, right? Everybody says, what color is this? Orange. It's orange, not blue. It's orange. The 20th guy, now he doesn't know that everybody was told to do this. So he knows blue is blue. It's not orange. They ask him what color it is. What does he say? Orange. Right? It's absurd. It makes no sense. He sees it's blue. But yet, and his whole life, his mother told him it's blue, his teachers told him everyone tells him it's blue, suddenly he says orange. Why? Because it's susceptible to things like that. Now, what if you were known as a person who's humble and you don't want to fight people? So even more so you're going to do that. Well, Yeshua was known as such a person. He was a very humble person. So Moshe had to come up with a way to help him stand up to the others, who he knew was going to be a fight. Now, Caleb also had the same problem, and Moshe doesn't change his name. But the Gemara tells us, and Rashi quotes it, that Caleb went to pray at the graves of his forefathers, right? Of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He went to pray to them, not to them, but pray to God at their graves, and to be inspired by them, because Abraham stood up to the whole world. Everybody says idols are the way, right? The idols created us, and he says no, and he smashes the idols. He stood up to the whole world. Every member of the forefathers did that, so he went to them for that purpose. So Yeshua doesn't. So the first thing is we have to know why is it that Moshe believes that Yeshua is so humble? Where does that come from? Does he just make it up? He has to know from somewhere. So if we look back in last week's parsha, it tells us a story about these two prophets, Eldad and Medad, these two prophets, and that they're prophesizing among the Jewish people. Right? And nothing wrong with that. Lots of Jews were prophets, and these two are saying a prophecy. But Yeshua sees them, like they go into a trance when you prophesize, and they say their prophecy, and Yeshua gets angry. And he goes to Moshe and says, we have to do something about this. These two guys are prophesizing in the middle of the Jewish people. So Moshe says, so what? Lots of prophets. What's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with being a prophet. It means you're close to God. Yeshua says, no. That's not the case. You know what their prophecy was? That Moshe is going to die, and I'm going to be the head of the Jewish people. And Yeshua says, that's not what I want. I want my Rabbi to be alive. I want you to stay alive. I don't want that. And if they prophesize it, it could happen. That prophecy is true. So he says, these people are false prophets. It can't be that my Rebbe is not going to take us to the land of Israel. Moshe is going to take it. Of course he is. We know he's not. Right? But Yeshua didn't like that. So here you see an example of Yeshua whose humility is that he doesn't recognize how great he is, and that he could lead the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and that God's expectation is that he will. But nevertheless, he's so blinded by his humility, he doesn't see it. And he's prepared that Moshe should kill those two people for lying, when they weren't lying. It was true. But he couldn't see it because he was so humble. So here, now Moshe knows he's humble. So what does he do? He changes his name. So how does he change his name? His name was Hosea, now it's Yehoshua. What's the change? The change is he adds a yud. He adds the yud at the beginning of his name. So if you see, in this line, here in 16, it says, Vayikra Moshe, Moshe calls La Hosea, right, Bin Nun Yehoshua. You see, he adds the yud at the beginning of his name. All the commentaries want to know, where does he get this yud from? Right? Where does he get the name? What kind of things? First thing, what do you mean, where does he get it from? You want to, when you named your children, you have children, you name your children, you had to get that name from somewhere? You had to, every letter has to come from something? You give a name, you give a name. It's a name. So what was the idea? That he took, he added a letter yud, because he's so humble that he's not going to be able to stand up to the other people, so I'm giving him the letter yud. So like you said, he comes from Sarah. Sarah, Abraham's wife, her name was Sari, which means my princess. And she became Sarah, which means the princess. She was the princess of the world. They took the yud away, they gave her a hey. They took away the yud from her name, Sari, and they gave her name Sarah. So the yud is now floating in space. So to speak, Moshe grabs that yud and puts it in Yeshua's name. And that's how his name becomes Yeshua. But the commentaries say, okay, this sounds very pretty, but why? What's the purpose? Why take it from Sarah? What has it got to do with anything? And he says, well, if you understand who Sarah was, the personality traits of her, you'll understand why it happened. Because what does Sarah do? Sarah says to her husband, I know I can't give you a child. At first she couldn't get pregnant. So go with my handmaiden, right, this woman who worked for her, and have relations with her, and you'll have a baby, and I'll raise the baby. The baby will be like mine and yours, but with her. So they do, and the baby is called Yishmael. Right? Now, eventually, Sarah has to go to her husband. Now, Abraham, everyone knows, was the embodiment of chesed, of kindness. It was very hard for him to do something that's difficult. Right? So it's mean or hard on people. He felt, we are going to, that we have to be inclusive, we have to be nice, and we have to care for people. And she comes to him one day and says, you know your son Yishmael? Send him out of here. He can't live here anymore. Send him away. Because look what he's doing to my son Yitzchak, because she later has a son. He's treating him badly. He's not right, what he does. Right? Now she's telling her husband, send him away. It's not an easy thing to do. Right? It's hard for him to do. It's hard for her to say it. Now, it's hard for her to say it because also he's going to say, what do you mean you got an ulterior motive? You want me to send him away because you want your son to be the only one. You want your son to be the best one. I'm not going to send away my son Yishmael because of our son Yitzchak. Right? But nevertheless, she does it. So you see she has the ability to stand up to her husband, who is the great Abraham, and tell him, this is what you got to do. And when he starts wondering, should I really do it or not, God says, whatever your wife Sarah says, do it. That's what he says. You should listen to whatever Sarah says. You should listen to her. God tells her, because she was a greater prophet than Abraham. So here we see that Sarah has this ability within her to stand up to him and tell him what's what. Right? That's what Moshe knew that Yeshua had to have. Yeshua needed that ability to stand up to all the other people and tell them the land of Israel is good, not bad. The land of Israel is what God wants for us, not some silly idea. So therefore, he got that from Sarah. That's where it comes from, the ability to do such a thing. So now we know why he changed his name, and why he gave him a Yud, and why the Yud came from Sarah. So that tells us just that right there. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Okay, well, we got quite lots of time. So it says that they go into the land for the next couple pages, and now they're going to come back. On page 802 and 803, they come back from the land. And, they went there, and you see that there's a description at the top of the page, and it says, if you look, actually go back to 801, the last line. It says they came back from spying for 40 days, and they reported to him, to Moshe, and they said, we arrived at the land to which you sent us, and indeed it flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. So first thing they come back and they say, the land of Israel is really, it's full of milk and honey. Now milk and honey here doesn't mean milk and honey like you and I think. It's like cow's milk and bees honey. Here it's talking about a different thing. He says, well, Rashi doesn't say it, but milk and honey is not honey like bees honey. It means that it comes from a date, the honey from a date. That's what it's talking about, and that's why you see so many dates in Israel. And milk, right, can literally mean milk, or it can mean the milk from almonds. There's a type of milk called almond milk. You can buy it now in the health food stores, right? Where almonds are also very common in Israel. So they're saying this land is filled of all these great fruits. And here's an example. And it says that they had these grapes that were so big it took 2 men to carry it. Right? So this is what the land of Israel's fruits are like. It's so beautiful, right? This is it. So then they go on. Then it says, "But Ephes ki azam." He says, but the people who live in the land are powerful. The cities are fortified and great. And we also saw that the offspring of the giant, That's Amalek dwells in the area. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, everyone's there, right? And now they're getting upset. And so then it says, Caleb quiets them down, and he says to Moshe, we shall surely ascend and conquer it. We're going to go to the land of Israel. We're going to take it over, because Caleb and Yeshua are saying what's correct. But the men who went with it said, we cannot ascend to that people, for they're too strong for us. And the people who live there are too tough. They're going to beat us. They brought forth the children of Israel an evil report on the land that they spied out, saying, the land through which we have passed to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And that's like the story I told you. And because so many people died, it's like it eats its people. All the people that we saw in it were huge. The people are giants. There we saw the Nephilim. They're giants. The sons of the giant from among the Nephilim. We were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so we were in their eyes. So that's what they saw. Right? And that's their report back. Now, if we read on, it says the Jewish people start complaining now. Moshe, this is what you want from us? You want to send us to this land? It's not enough. We had to be slaves in Egypt. We had to go to war with Pharaoh. We had to wander around the desert. Right? What do you want to do? Like, what do you do to us? You're taking us out of Egypt, so we should die in the land of Israel? Better we should have stayed in Egypt in the first place. At least there we're alive. Why are you doing this to us? Right? They're all upset. And it says that they went and they dug graves in the sand, in the desert, and they laid in the graves. And they said, better we should die here and not die in war. What do we need to go to war for? We'll just die here. Right? So it says a voice came out from heaven, and it said, just as you cry today for no reason, in the future you will cry today for good reason. That's what it says. They're crying today for no reason because the land of Israel is going to be theirs. There's no reason to cry. But because you doubt me, God says, and you're crying, they're crying because they don't believe they're going to get the land. So they said that in the future, on this day, you will cry. And this is an allusion to the 9th day of Av, Tisha B'Av, which is a sad day for the Jewish people. It is called the day of national Jewish mourning, when all Jews mourn over the destruction of the temple and all the deaths and the fact that we were sent out to live as we live today. That's what the 9th of Av is. And that was the 9th of Av. So now we have the first reference to the idea of the 9th of Av being a difficult day for Jews. And it all comes from the fact that the Jews denied God's ability to let them take over the land. And they said, what are you doing to us? You bring us to the desert so that we should die here? Right? So God says, you're crying for nothing? Because there's no reason to cry. You're going to get in the land. Then today I'll give you a reason to cry. So eventually he destroys the first temple on that day and the second temple on that day. And many, many things happen in Jewish history on that day, the 9th day of Av. And that's where it comes from here. Also, they were cursed that they would stay in the desert for 40 years. Because at this point, we're still dealing with the second year of their being in the desert. And they're about to go to the land of Israel. I mean, that's why they're spying. They're about to go in. And God says, hold on, you're not going anywhere. Not with the way you're acting. Not one of you people who were in Egypt is going to the land of Israel. You're all going to die in the desert. It's going to take 40 years. And then from this point on, they wander in the desert for another 38 years because of how they acted. But there's a couple of very interesting telltale signs that you know there's something fishy going on. Because they just tell you what they saw. But how do we know that it's not real? So one of the interesting lines is the last line that I said, which is line 33 on 803. It says, there, in the land of Israel, we saw the Nephilim. The Nephilim are, it's hard to describe literally. They mean these special giants who are extraordinary people. Then it says, we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so we were in their eyes. In other words, here you have these giant, strong people. Well, imagine, everybody in this country is 10 feet tall, and they're built like Hulk Hogan, right, with giant muscles. And here we are, these little Jewish guys coming into the land of Israel, and these are giants. How are we going to beat them, right? We're not going to beat them. They're giants. So he said, we're like grasshoppers compared to them in our own eyes. And when they saw us, they saw the same thing, right? But the fact that it says this tells you something. When the Jewish people, or the Hebrews, the Jewish people left, and they spied, and they came out and they said, we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, they were telling you a fact. The fact that if you think you're a grasshopper, if you think that you're not going to be able to do this, then that's how everybody else is going to see you. They said, we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so were we in theirs. But really, if they had said that we were, when we were there, we were strong, and we can make a difference, and that's how they would see them. People relate to you in the way that you act. If you act like a nebuch, people look at you like a nebuch. If you act like a failure, people see you as a failure. If you act successful, people see you as successful. So here they're saying, we're like grasshoppers. Who are we, right? And they find out, right? Of course, and that's how they looked at us. Therefore, it's important to realize they walked in with a preconceived notion. We're not going to win. We're going to lose. One of the reasons these people are so tough, we're like grasshoppers. They'll just stand on us. But that's wrong. You have God with you. You can do anything. You're not like grasshoppers. The only reason that you feel that way is because that's how you act. It's like I said before, God leads a person in the way they want to go. If you want to do something badly, God will allow you to do it, even if it's something that maybe not best for you. But if you really want to do it, God lets you do it. He leads you in the way you want to go. These people did not want to go to the land of Israel. So God showed them these giants who lived there. And they said, who are we to go to war with them? We're these little tiny people. Well, the reality is, you might be those little tiny people who are coming into the land of Israel against these heathen savages. But the reality is, you've got a nuclear bomb. You've got God on your side. You're not going to lose. But yet they saw themselves as grasshoppers, so that's how they were seen. So that's why it says it there. This was actually, just as an aside, back in the 1990s, I'm pretty sure it was Eric Sharon, and he was giving a description about the ongoing fights with the Palestinians, and he said that they're like grasshoppers in our eyes. Right? He was quoting this line. The world said that he was calling the Palestinians bugs. Right? In other words, they're not human beings. They're disgusting bugs. Right? And I can step on a bug and kill it. Right? That's not what he meant at all. He was saying the opposite. He was saying, right, like that we feel compared to them like grasshoppers, and that's how they see us. Right? Not that we were saying that they're bugs. So you see that the statement he made was actually trying to show that we can't just go and destroy these people. They're human beings. They also have authority. They also have lives. We can't do that. And therefore he made the statement. But the whole world misunderstood that. I don't know if you remember it, but I remember it was in all the newspapers how he could say such a thing. A Jew would call a non-Jew like that. Because the non-Jews in general, they're among many of the religious people. There's a fear that Jews think they're not human, that they're lower than us. Right? And that's not true. Nowhere in our literature does it say that a non-Jew is less than a Jew. They're different than a Jew. But less and more have nothing to do with it. Now, they're better than Jews, not better than Jews, smarter, not smarter. None of that's true. None of that's true. I can find you Jews that are smarter than non-Jews. I can find you Jews that are not. I can show you ones who are more righteous. There's ones who are less righteous. There's ones who are stronger, the ones who's not as strong. It's got nothing to do with the fact that you're Jewish or not Jewish. Right? You have potential to be great if you're a Jew. You have a higher relationship with God based on what you do. But it's not innate. It's not like a gift. You have to do something. So, for us to in any way try to be disparaging, talk down about non-Jews is a problem. In fact, those of you who get my email that I send out every week, if you don't get it and you want to, you should tell me. But I wrote, when I was in Israel, I wrote an article that I sent out last week on Thursday. And in the article, I talked about something that had gone on in Toronto before I left, which was that the police department released the 2009 reports on violence in Toronto, about all the different types of violent things that went on, how many murders, how many criminal acts, how many burglaries, right, all of this. One of the sections was hate crimes. Hate crime, right? The police. How many times did the police have to investigate hate crimes? How many people were attacked because of their color or their religion? How many people were treated badly because of their color or their religion? And they tell you how many times and how many were investigated and what happened. It's all in the report. So of course, sadly, the number one group in Toronto who gets these hate crimes is the Jews. The number two were the gays. The number three were blacks. Right? If you go down the list, like, there was this one had 22 occurrences, this one had 10. You go down to the bottom of the list, there's a couple that had one. One thing happened this year. Somebody called, let's say, a Polish person a name, so they went and reported it, and that's a hate crime. Right, so one of the things it said was, a category was called non-Jewish shiksa. So it said, some woman, right, who was not Jewish was walking in the Bathurst Lawrence area, and somebody called her a non-Jewish shiksa. And she was offended and went to the police and said, that's a hate crime. They're calling me a name based on my religion. And therefore, she wanted them to prosecute it. So the police went, right, so that's the law. They went and they tried to find who it was. They couldn't find who it was, and it was finished. Nothing came of it. But since it was reported, they had to put it in the report. So on the one hand, everybody, when the report came out, so in the newspaper, everybody was making fun of it. Right? This woman writes in that she is not Jewish. And she says, I always thought that Jewish men wanted somebody like me. I thought it was a good thing. Right? And they're all making jokes about it. And the Jews are writing in and they're making jokes. But I found that I was a bit disappointed by it. And the reasoning is, the newspaper, their point was that everybody feels that they're a victim. Everyone's a victim. So I need to go and get the government to help me. But I said it's a really different thing, which is here we are, we're Jews living in 2010 in a country that makes it for us that we're not only does it allow us to practice Judaism, they encourage us to practice Judaism. If you give money to a shul, they give you money back from the government, right? You get a tax receipt, right? They don't have to do that. They want you to give money to Jewish causes. They want you to practice religion. They like this. This is good. And in countries throughout the world, in a history of the Jews, they would kill you for practicing Judaism. And here they want you to practice it. And we live among non-Jews, and for the most part, we live peacefully among non-Jews. And therefore, for us to call a non-Jew a shiksa, right, which is a disgusting word in and of itself, is a terrible thing for us to do. We need to be careful how we talk. We have to speak sophisticatedly. We have to speak with a certain amount of dignity. We have to act in a positive manner so that people realize who we are and what we stand for. And we shouldn't talk in such a way. And this message that the police investigated this, right, should hit home to us and say, we're living in a country that wants us to be Jewish, and all they ask of us is to integrate and live with other people. And what do? We go and call them names. Right? Well, we can't do that. I understand 150 years ago, we're living in shtetls, and the non-Jewish world was against us in every way. And once in a while, you'd have today they were called the dumb blonde, right? That was the shiksa of the old days, and they would make fun of her. She had no morals, she had no education, because the non-Jews in many societies didn't give rights to women, and they didn't educate women, so the women were uneducated, and all they had was how they looked. That was them. That's all they had. So to call a non-Jewish woman like that, you could understand it. But today, and I don't say it was right then, but you could understand it. Today, there's no reason to do this. And that idea of calling someone in such a manner that the police reported is something that's below us. We should not do these types of things. We're way above that. And that's the idea that when they complain, the world complains, the Jews think that non-Jews aren't human, right? We only make it worse when we talk that way, because they do believe this. There are many non-Jews who will quote pieces of the Talmud that they would say shows us that they believe that Jews think that non-Jews aren't human, and it's not true. They are human, and we have to take care of them, and we have to do chesed, kindness for them, and we have to give them tzedakah. Sure, there's priorities and there's ways of doing things, and we're not supposed to socialize and become one of them. But the reality is, they're human beings. They were created in the image of God, just like we are. And we have no right, and in fact, it's an insult to our beliefs for us to call them names. And that's what it's referring to here, just to give you an idea on that. How are we doing now? And I just went on, okay? So let's look at one more piece. So, really, this the whole parsha really only deals with the idea of the spies and what happens with the spies and the effect on us. But it is, I think, it's important for us to understand a bit more about this concept with the spies and why it is that God punished us forever because of what they did. Because it says, like I told you, they came back afterwards and they told their report about how bad the land of Israel is. So, and then everyone goes back to, it gets to be dark, and they all go back to where they're living, and they dig graves. And they tell God, just bury us now. Why should we go and fight this war and get killed? Just bury us now. And that's when God says, that's it. Right? Tonight you are crying and you're giving up hope for no reason, then in the future you'll have a reason to cry. And this idea of Tisha B'Av, it shows us a very important thing when it comes to time, to understanding time. See, most of the world, when they look at time, they look at it like a timeline, right? You have a long line, and this is the year 1, this is the year 1000, this is the year 2000, and you follow time. But let's say if you're here in the year 1000, what happened yesterday is gone, because you're here. What happens in the future isn't here yet, right? So you're only living in the moment. That's where you are. In Judaism, we don't believe in a timeline. We have like a circle, and time goes in a circle. So this is Rosh Hashanah, and you go through the year, and you come back to Rosh Hashanah. And every year is a circle on top of the circle. The difference in the two is that if you have a timeline, and you get to the 4th of July, or the 1st of July, right? Canada Day, the 1st of July. So what happens on the 1st of July in 2010? You know what happens? Nothing. You make a barbecue. Nothing happens on that day. Because what the purpose of that day is to remind us that Canada became a country. So we remember and we celebrate it because it's good to be here, right? But it didn't become a country in 2010. We remember it. It became a country, right? But it didn't do it. When you get to Rosh Hashanah, right, in our calendar, we don't say that today the world was created, and so we want to remember the world was created, so we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. No, today we believe that we have a judgment. God is judging us. This is our annual review. The whole world is being renewed. That is to say that when God created the world in the first year, right, 57, 70 years ago, when He created the world on Rosh Hashanah, and human beings were created on Rosh Hashanah, so that every year there's this idea of creation, of judgment, of review that's in the air and it's real. In other words, we don't remember Rosh Hashanah, we relive Rosh Hashanah. We remember the 1st of July. We don't relive the 1st of July. We don't have an independence. We remember the independence. When it comes to Pesach, we don't remember the going out of Egypt. We're told to feel like we went out of Egypt, right? We relive it. And Tisha B'Av is the same thing. So the idea is that when the Jews had so much despair, they gave up all of their hope. When God tells them directly, I'm going to take you into the land. You're going to live in the land of Israel. Your life will be together with me, and you will have the life to lead the world to a moral world. And they get back this report that things are going to be hard. And they just say, I don't care what God said. We're not getting in. We're going to get killed. And they said, there's no hope. And so God says, therefore, not me, you put that desperation, that lack of hope into the air. Every year on this day, it's going to affect you. It's never going away. It's always on that day, on the 9th day of Av. It will always be there. Just like we're always forgiven on Yom Kippur, not we remember being forgiven. We are forgiven, like we go out of Egypt every year on Passover. Not that we remember it, we do it. Right? On Tisha B'Av, right, we have this feeling of desperation and these terrible things happen to us. Right? We can fix it, but in the meantime, that's what happens. And so God is not punishing specifically the Jewish people for the fact that they despaired. God is saying, when you despair, it changes the world. It affects the world. And your desperation, your feeling of hopelessness was so bad that it was going to carry on forever into the future. So therefore, the Spanish Inquisition began on Tisha B'Av, and the first temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, and the second temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av. The city of Beitar, all the people were killed on Tisha B'Av. The world dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki on Tisha B'Av. All of these things happen on Tisha B'Av. Example, why? Because it's a day that we caused the world to have a negative thing because we denied God's ability to get us into the land of Israel as He promised, and that we were afraid of the soldiers. That's what it was, and that we can't do. We have to have that hope. We can never despair. We can never become hopeless, because God promises He's going to do it. He'll do it. Yes.
Does it show that we're punished every time we don't have a moon?
Well, there's within ourselves, by not having a Munah, we hurt ourselves. But here we're talking about a case that was so enormous. The entire Jewish people who just got the Torah, right, saw God, and God said, I'm going to take you to the land of Israel. Right? I said, I'm going to take you out of Egypt. Did I do it? Yeah. I said, I'm going to split the Red Sea. Did I do it? Yeah. I said, I'm going to give you the Torah. Did I do it? Yeah. You wanted food in the desert? I gave it to you, right? So have I ever not done what I said? So now I'm telling you, I'm taking the land of Israel, and you don't believe me. And you have to send spies. All right, I'll live with the spies. And the spies come back and say bad things, and you believe them. So you believe the spies before you believe me. So that was like an enormous thing. It wasn't like one person not acting with emunah. The entire Jewish people gave up hope. We're just going to lay in our grave. Just drop the dirt on us already. We're dead. That had enough power to affect the world spiritually, so that forever that day is bad. So that's what happens then. All right, so just some thoughts for this week.